Cool. Hey everyone, thanks for coming along. So I normally start this talk with a quote, and generally it's kind of a bit buzzwordy. So what we're going to do instead is today we're going to start that talk with a question instead. And that's the question of, if that works. Cool. Of what does Agent Smith from The Matrix, what does the Joker from Batman, and what does Darth Vader from Star Wars all have in common? And it's not the fact that they're all from movies. It's not the fact that they're all bad guys. It's the fact that they're all bad guys with motives and purposes. Right? It's the fact that they all do what they do for a reason. Whether that's enslaving humanity in The Matrix or building the Death Star in Star Wars, all of these bad guys do something for a reason. And then in these movies as well, we'll see the heroes use those motives and those purposes against the bad guys in one form or another. And that's kind of what offender profiling is, right? So because offender profiling is all about creating a knowledge base on malicious actors. It's all about looking at the bigger picture behind attacks so that we can better protect us and our customers. Coming back to that quote then, it's about preemptive security, about the idea of doing something now, spending some money now, spending some time now to help protect ourselves in the future. And offender profiling is a type of preemptive security. Because as I said, offender profiling is all about looking at these people, right? It's all about building bigger pictures, building knowledge bases, and understanding what's happening. I want to break today up into three main areas. I want to talk about what offender profiling actually is. I want to talk about what already exists. So some white papers, some research papers that use offender profiling. And then I'm going to talk about how else we can use offender profiling, how we can use offender profiling in security operations, and some practical methods for doing so. This talk normally lasts around 20 to 30 minutes, so I've added on some additional stuff where we're going to go through how we can use these methods for offender profiling with real-world attack data. To begin with, though, who am I? Well, my name is James Stevenson, and this time last year I was a student at the University of South Wales studying computer security. As well as that, before that, I was an intern at Alert Logic, a computer security company, and these days I'm a graduate in BT security. I've also run several websites, jamesstevenson.me, hackinginsider.com, and I'm also on Twitter at _James Stevenson. That's kind of like all the boring stuff, right? We don't really care about that. So coming back to offender profiling, right? What is offender profiling? I keep talking about it, but what actually is it? As I said, offender profiling is all about that knowledge base, right? But knowledge base, what does that actually mean? So for offender profiling, we can break that knowledge base down into three main areas. Information on the target, so the who and the what. Who is our target? Are they an individual, a group? Are they a government organization? And what was targeted? So what specific asset was targeted? To build that knowledge base, we also need some information on our attacker. Again, the who and the what. So who is our attacker? Are they an individual, a group? Are they state-sponsored? And what attack vector did they use? Finally, the last piece of information we need to create that knowledge base is just some general information. And that's, when did this attack occur? And why did this attack occur? And it's all of this information that comes together that allows us to build this knowledge base, that allows us to look at the bigger picture of these attacks. There's an example I like giving for offender profiling, and I'll be also like giving it because it's simple, so easy to get our heads around. It's the idea of a DOS attack, so a denial of service attack. Let's say we're protecting a customer's network, and they're continually getting DOSed by a Scandinavian hacker group, let's say between the hours of 3 and 6 each day. And then for the rest of the day, it's drips and drabs. So we can tell our customer, okay, put extra load balancers in place at these times. And then for the rest of the day, use what you usually have. So here we've used offender profiling, we've used preemptive security, and some general security techniques to help protect our customers. So that's what offender profiling is, but why is it important? Why do we need it? Well, this is a quote from the Los Angeles police chief. It's actually to do with predictive policing, but I think it describes offender profiling quite well. It's the idea that we're not getting more staff, we're not getting more money. We have to use what we have now effectively. And that's the same in security. So security is not the buzzword it once was. It doesn't have the endless budgets it once did. It's all about utilization, using what we have right here and now. So then if we can use offender profiling, if we can use preemptive security to put some security techniques or precautions in place now, then that can help us protect against something exponential in the future. So that's why offender profiling is important, but why is security important, right? We wouldn't be here today if we didn't believe security was important. Well, this is a statistic from Have I Been Pwned. I'm sure most of us today know what Have I Been Pwned is, but if you don't, it's a database of breached account credentials, right? You type your email address in, and it tells you if you've been part of a data breach. So this is the amount of compromised accounts that were listed in Have I Been Pwned on the 12th of the 2nd, 2018. Right, and this number is really interesting, right? It's interesting because, well, it's a massive number. But it's also interesting because it shows us security isn't going anywhere. It shows us security is in it for the long haul. Because as long as we have things that can be broken. And as long as we have things that can be broken, we have things that need protecting. So that's why offender profiling is important. That's why security is important. But what already exists? What are some examples of white papers, of research papers that use offender profiling? This is a white paper by Mandiant. It's probably the first white paper I ever read. It's on APT1, a Chinese hacker group that target Western organizations believed to be state-sponsored. This white paper goes into who APT1 are, goes into their motives, goes into their attack patterns, and builds a bigger picture on who they are and what they do. I've got another white paper here. This one is written by FSICO. This white paper is similar, but this time it goes into the Callisto group. But again, builds a bigger picture on who they are. Looks at motives, looks at attack patterns, and all in all, it allows us to see who these bad guys are. Our final white paper. This one is slightly different. This is by McAfee, and this is McAfee's annual threat report. This white paper goes into a whole range of different malicious actors, different motives, different attack patterns, but again, builds a bigger picture on all of them. And we can probably start seeing a pattern here, right? Because offender profiling is all about that bigger picture. It's all about building that bigger picture to help protect us. So that's an example of how we can use offender and attack profiling in research and white papers. But where else can we use offender profiling? If we cast our minds back to 2011, right, the Stuxnet worm is super prominent. It targets PLCs, so programmable logic controllers, and it's reportedly damaged 1/5 of a brand's nuclear capability. But actually, if we cast our minds even further back, we knew very little about Stuxnet. And Ralph Langer says it best, who's an industrial control systems security consultant. And he says, well, yeah, at the time, we knew very little about Stuxnet. We didn't know who it was targeting. We didn't know who made it. They were looking for certain things, though, right? So they had the code. And they said, well, we're looking for system calls, we're looking for timers, data structures, and really anything that can link us back to that real-world target. And this is a great example of how we can use offender profiling to not just build bigger pictures on attackers, but to also build bigger pictures on targets as well, so profiling the target. And then they made their own knowledge base. So they said, well, it's a highly well-written code, it's probably sabotage, it's got a high-value target, and to be honest, the target is most probably in Iran. And this just shows us how we can use offender profiling for other areas, how we can use the techniques in other areas, and it's not just about profiling our attackers. So what's one more way that we can use offender profiling or attack profiling techniques? Well, as I said earlier, I worked in a security operations center. I worked in a company called AlertLogic for, all in all, around about a year. And at a high level, we can break a security operations center down, a SOC down, into two main elements. We have our customer, and we have our SOC. Our customer will normally have an IDS, an intrusion detection system, a WAF, web application firewall, or some sort of logging system. They'll then send those logs to our SOC. In our SOC, we'll have an analyst who will review those logs. They'll say, well, what's actually happening here? Is this a false positive? Is this a false negative? They'll then write up some form of feedback and send that back to the customer. And this generally works really well, right? We get this really good feedback loop. We get logs, analysis, feedback. And yeah, that generally works really well. The problem with that, though, is we're only ever looking at one attack at a time. We might be looking at multiple incidents or multiple events, but really we're only ever looking at one attack. And the problem is, we're not looking at the bigger picture, right? The bigger picture of which we said was so important for offender profiling. So the question is, could we implement offender profiling into security operations? Well, yes, we could. It's been done. One of the ways we do this is by latching on a framework to what already exists, by adding a framework for offender profiling to our SOC, rather than starting afresh. So the way this works is we take our logs as usual. We analyze them as usual. But then we also start bucketing that information. We say, well, this attack is related to an attack you had a month ago. This attack is related to an attack you had a week ago. And this attack is related to another attack another one of our customers has had. So here we're sending that information back to our customer. With our general analysis, we're sending it back. And this is allowing our customers to compare attacks, to prioritize attacks, or to just simply understand what's happening. So this is Alice. Alice is a security analyst for an up-and-coming security startup. Alice manages a small team of security analysts, and it's their job to deal with security incidents as they come in. These incidents can be an array of attacks, and it's then their job to action those security incidents. So actioning can be anything from writing up feedback to phoning a customer, remoting into a system, and generally that works really well. Where that doesn't work really well, however, is when Alice's team is swamped. They really get swamped. And that's because all of these attacks are prioritized on time. So the sooner an attack comes in, the higher a priority it has. And Alice doesn't like this, right? Alice wants to find a way that her and her team can prioritize these attacks based off other factors. Because what happens is we get the high-risk attacks drowned in a sea of low-risk attacks. So Alice has done some research, and she's looked into methods such as looking at risk, looking at frequency, looking at attack classification, and these are the methods that we're going to be talking about for the rest of today. So now when Alice and her team receive these security incidents, they're safe in assuming that the higher a priority an attack has, the higher a risk it has as well. And then they can be actioned accordingly. So you might be thinking, well, James, that's great. Surely it's time to dive into our first method for offender profiling. Well, not quite. Before we do that, we have to do something I like to call method 0 for offender profiling. And method 0 is all about building an information classification or an asset profile, right? It's all about understanding what we're protecting. Because at the end of the day, we can't protect what we don't know. As I said earlier, I own a website, jamesstevenson.me. That's an asset. That's something I'm protecting. That's its name. Well, its classification. Is it high risk? Is it low risk? Its description. Well, it's a WordPress website running an email server backend. Its owner, custodian, that's myself. And finally, the user, that's the public, that's you and I. And again, the reason why we build these asset profiles is so we can better protect them. Let's say we have two assets, a high-risk asset and a low-risk asset. And we have a malicious actor targeting both of them. If that was the only information we had, which of these assets would we prioritize? Well, it'd probably be the high-risk asset, right? Because that one's intrinsically of a higher risk. And we'll see how this comes into play later on. But for now, we just need to know that to better protect our assets, we need to know what they actually are. So moving on to our first method for offender profiling. This is called method 1, attack frequency plotting. And I'm a fan of the name of this method because it actually describes what it's trying to do. Because it's all to do with plotting the frequency of attacks. The way we do this is we take a time frame. So here we've got the time frame of around about a month. And whenever we see an attack from a specific malicious actor to a specific asset, we increase its frequency. It's not as simple as adding 1, there's some maths behind it, but really we just need to know it increases. And then if we don't see an attack from a specific malicious actor to a specific asset, we decrease that frequency, we half-life it. So what we end up getting is these peaks and these troughs for attack frequency. And that's really useful, because that then allows us to compare attacks. So here we can see two different malicious actors. We can see a malicious actor from Russia in a red, and a malicious actor from China in a blue. We can see that the malicious actor from China continues to attack the asset throughout this time frame, while the malicious actor from Russia attacks, stops, and continues. So again, if this was the only information we had, which of these attacks would we prioritize? Well, it'd probably be the malicious actor from Russia, right? Oh, China even, because that one is far more frequent. It's far more pressing on us or our customers, while the one from Russia is just less so. And we'll see this come as a trending pattern throughout. So moving on to our next method for offender profiling. This method looks at risk. It says, what is the risk of this attack to my or my customer's organization? And the way it does this is it asks several questions. We then answer those questions with a number between 0 and 10. Questions like the complexity of attack, ease of discovery, ease of exploit, loss of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And these are also broken down into two subcategories, likelihood and impact. We then take an average of each of those subcategories, times them together to get our overall risk. And that overall risk will be a score between 0 and 100, where the higher the score, the higher the risk. So again then, if we had two malicious actors, or two attacks, one attack with a risk of 70, and one attack with a risk of 30, which of those attacks would we prioritize? Well, it'd probably be the risk of 70, right? Because that one is intrinsically higher. It intrinsically has that higher risk. And again, we'll see how all of this comes together later on. Moving on to our next method for offender profiling. So here, I really didn't want to talk about the cyber kill chain, right? Some people love the cyber kill chain, and some people hate the cyber kill chain. For those of you that don't know, the cyber kill chain is a method by Lockheed Martin for analyzing the life cycle of malware exploitation. Right, it generally works really well. It's got several areas, from reconnaissance to weaponization to actions and objectives, and they're sections that a malicious actor should undergo as part of deploying malware. And again, generally it works really well. Where it doesn't work really well, however, is it's generally overused. It's used in a whole range of areas in security when really it should only be used in deploying malware. So what we're going to use today is a far more generic kill chain model for computer security. A model that has 5 areas, from researching the target, testing infrastructure, actively attacking, actions, which is doing the thing, and then finally covering tracks and planting backdoors. And these are the stages that the malicious actor might undergo as part of their attack. And you might be thinking, well, James, that's great and all, but what does that have to do with offender profiling? And the reason why we do this is so we can pin these categories to our malicious actors. So we can say, well, at this time and date, malicious actor A was in the research stage. Well, at this same time and date, malicious actor B was in the actions stage. So if that was the only information we had, which of these malicious actors would we prioritize? Well, it'd probably be the malicious actor in the actions stage, right? Because that one is further along in their attack. The malicious actor in the research stage may never get to that stage. Moving on to our penultimate method for offender profiling. This method can be the simplest, or it can be the most complex, because it's all to do with asking questions. And the simple answer is we might just not know the answer to them. We ask questions on the target and questions on the malicious actor. Questions like, well, who was the target? With an individual, a group, a government organization? And was anyone else targeted? Was this part of a massive reconnaissance attack? Or was this part of a singular spearfishing attack? We then also have to ask, well, why were they targeted? For example, why was company A targeted and not company B next door targeted? Once we've asked questions on the target, we also ask questions on the malicious actor. Again, we ask, well, who were they? Were they an individual, a group? Were they state-sponsored? And what was their motive? Was it malicious? Was it financial? Was it hacktivism? And finally, well, did anything happen leading up to this attack? Was there anything in the news? Was there anything in social media? Were there any new laws or legislation passed? And finally, it's all of the information from these questions that allow us to answer this final question. And that's, with the information we have now, with the information we have in our target, and the information we have in our malicious actor, is this attack likely to continue? Because building a bigger picture is great, right? Building that knowledge base is great. But actually understanding if we're still at risk is far more important. So moving on to our final method for offender profiling. This is called method 5, but really it could be called method 0.5. Because instead of looking at offender profiling, it looks at offender categorizing. It says, can we create a subunique naming convention for our malicious actors that we can glean information from? The way it does this is it breaks that naming convention up into 4 main areas. Information on the location, so where they were first seen, the date they were first seen, the risk level for that malicious actor. So again, that's that number we saw earlier, so that number between 0 and 100. And finally, the last octet of the first seen or most common IP address related to that malicious actor. So again, the reason why we do this is to have a subunique identifier for our malicious actors. So here we could use IP addresses, we could use MAC addresses, we could use hashes. This is just one example of something we could use. So there we have it. We've kind of looked at the first section. So we've looked at what offender profiling is and why it's important. We've looked at what already exists. So some white papers, some research papers that use offender profiling. And we've also looked at how we can use offender profiling in security operations. For this next part of the talk, I'm going to go through how we can use some of these methods for offender profiling with real-world attack data. Now, when I was creating this talk, I couldn't decide, do I want this to be a live demo? Do I want this not to be a live demo? So we've somewhat clashed in the middle. We're going to be going through this live attack data, but it's attack data from the past. So we're going to be going through why certain decisions have been made on this data. So what are we actually going to be looking at? Well, we're going to be covering most of the methods we've spoken about. We're going to be looking at method 0. So we're going to be building an asset profile or an information classification. We're going to be looking at method 0.5. So we're going to be categorizing our malicious actors. Then we're going to be looking at methods 1 to 3. So we're going to look at attack frequency, attack risk, and the category those attacks fall into. Now you might be thinking, well, James, where's this attack data coming from? Well, we're going to be using some honeypots. So we've got 3 small honeypots set up across Canada, Germany, and Amsterdam. And they're using MHN, which is the Modern Honeypot Network. If you want to know more about it, that's a link to an article on my website that gives you a brief synopsis on how it all works. Now the problem is, when using this honeypot data, right, if we were to profile them as they were, all the honeypots might be the same, all of the attack data might be the same. So what we're going to do instead, to sprucing it up, we're going to imagine that these honeypots are what they're pretending to be. So what do I mean by that? Well, this is our first honeypot. This is a honeypot based out of Germany. This is an Elasticsearch honeypot. So if you don't know what Elasticsearch is, it's a data aggregation tool, kind of like a database, but not quite. But we're going to use our imagination, and we're going to pretend that this honeypot is what it's pretending to be. So we're going to imagine that this Elasticsearch honeypot is an Elasticsearch server, that it belongs to a fake organization called Feedback Systems, is a medium risk asset, and is primarily used by their software engineers, but for one reason or another is accessible via the internet. Our next honeypot. This honeypot is based out of Canada. This is a general website honeypot, but we're going to use our imagination again, and we're going to pretend that this is a blogging website, with a login form, a few articles, and we're going to pretend that it belongs to another fake organization called tech.blog. It's a medium risk asset and accessible via the internet. Our final honeypot, or our final asset, is based out of Amsterdam. This is an industrial control system honeypot, and we're going to use our imaginations again, and we're going to pretend that this is a telecommunications industrial control system, high-risk asset, and primarily used by highly trained staff. So there we have our 3 main assets, right? We've got our Feedback Systems Elasticsearch asset, we've got our tech.blog blogging website asset, and we've got our telecommunications industrial control system asset. So as well as these 3 main assets, we also have 3 main malicious actors. We have a malicious actor from the US, a malicious actor from China, and a malicious actor from Bangladesh. So throughout this talk, we're going to have 2 icons on the lower of the screen. One of them is going to be a flag, and that's going to indicate which malicious actor is currently attacking which asset. And we're also going to have a text box, and that's going to indicate which asset is currently being targeted. So looking at our first malicious actor from the US. Here we can see our honeypot dashboard, right? We can see all of the attacks from this malicious actor to this asset. And what we can immediately see is, well, to be honest, there aren't that many attacks. They're happening in general time frame, but there aren't that many. Compared to the attacks we'll see later on, it's not that many at all. Next, we can look at the risk. So earlier on, we said that the way we work out risk for these attacks is by answering several questions. Questions like the complexity of attack, ease of discovery, ease of exploit, loss of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So these have also been broken down into 2 subcategories, a 0 to 5 subcategory and a 6 to 10 subcategory. And again, these have previously been answered. But what we can see here is, to be honest, again, not only does this attack have its low frequency, it also generally has quite a low risk. And we'll see that reiterated later on. And then finally, for this attack, we need to look at the category this attack falls into. Because as we said earlier on, that's a big factor that comes into the risk of the attack. So this says, well, this is an enumeration attack. So it's not going to fall into the research stage, it's not going to fall into the attacking stage, it's going to fall into the testing infrastructure stage. So we can see all of that information reiterated here, right? We can see our generally low frequency, we can see our category, and we can see our generally low risk. So if we go back to Alice, how might this attack fit in a security operations center? Well, generally it's got that low risk. We can see the sort of information we might want to see, but it's been prioritized quite low, because generally there are far more important attacks that need to be dealt with first. Moving on to our next malicious actor, a malicious actor from China. Again, we can see similar information in our Honeypot dashboard. But this time we can see a lot more attacks. We can see around about 7 pages or 8 pages of 10 attacks each, rather than the 6 previously. And what we can also see this time is a lot of them are happening in quick succession. And what that shows us is that this attack is probably automated or has an automated element. And again, let's just bear that in mind for later on. Again, we can look at risk. So again, we're saying, what is the risk of this attack to us or tech.blog? And again, these have been previously answered. So we've got generally similar answers to last time, right? But this time we've got some in the 6 to 10 category. And what that shows us is that this attack or this asset is a slightly higher risk than our previous asset. Finally, for this attack, we again look at the category. We say, what is the category of this attack? So if this is a brute force attack against that login form we saw previously, then it's probably going to fall into the actively attacking stage. And again, we can see that reiterated here. We can see our frequency, our category, and our overall risk. Again, we can see how that might fit in a security operations center. We can see how an attack like this might be prioritized compared to others, and we can see the sort of information we might want to see if we were a security analyst. Moving on to our final malicious actor. So again, we can see very similar information in our dashboard, in our Honeypot dashboard. We can see an array of attacks from this malicious actor to our telecommunications industrial control system asset. And again, we can see a lot of them happening in quick succession. So again, that shows us, okay, well maybe this attack is automated or has that automated element. Again, we can look at risk. So we can say, well, what is the risk of this attack to our new asset, so our telecom asset? And for this one, we'd assume that we'd have a lot more in that 6 to 10 category, right? Because this is a higher risk asset. Rather than our 2 previous assets, we're looking at something in a different level. So yes, sure, we can see some in the 8 to 10s, that general range. And then finally, for this malicious actor, we can see, well, what category does this attack fall into? This says that this is a directory traversal attack, so it's going to fit into that testing infrastructure stage. And we can see all of that reiterated for the last time. We can see our frequency, our category, and generally a higher risk than we've seen previously. And finally, we can see that reiterated in Alice's Security Operations Center. Again, we can see that this has quite a high frequency, it's got the high risk, and we can see the different parts of information we might want to see. So we've kind of looked at how we can use real-world attack data with these methods for offender profiling. The next part of this talk is really just summarizing what we've gone through. And the real takeaway of this talk is to be more like Alice, right? It's the idea of taking that step back, building those bigger pictures, building those knowledge bases. Whether that's using industry tools like the cyber kill chain, the Diamond model for intrusion analysis, or if it's by using some of the models we've spoken about today. Because it's all about allowing us or our customers to look at what's happening, to prioritize attacks, compare attacks, or to just simply understand what's happening to us or our customers. Kind of the next and final takeaway of this talk is inspired by this quote. And it's all to do with intrusion analysis, network analysis, security analysis. Because generally they're all to do with understanding something. If we look at it at kind of the bare bones, they're all about understanding. And in the cases where that's about understanding an attack, offender profiling shows us that every attack is orchestrated, right? That every attack has a motive and a purpose. And in better understanding that motive and purpose, we can better protect ourselves or our customers. So we've got around about 30 minutes, 20 minutes left. Thanks to you and the organisers as well. If you've got any questions, feel free to ask me now. You can find me afterwards. You can also find me on Twitter _James Stevenson as well. Yeah, thanks guys.